Take it away,
All right.
either Gently or Kara. There you go.
I'll introduce her real quick. So just like Patsy said, the first section or first section of our session today is focused on getting prepared for the show. Kara Comstock, I'll let her introduce herself here in a second, but she's going to lead us through that discussion and hopefully give you guys some pointers on just what you should expect and how you should prepare to head out to your first show. Kara, take it away.
All right, awesome. Give me just a second as I get my screen shared. Okay, can you guys see that PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So yeah, like Denali said, my name's Kara Comstock. I grew up in Missouri, showing a little bit of everything, but showed quite a few hogs back in the day through 4-H and FFA at all levels. And I've been fortunate enough to find some success in that and currently serve as 4-H agent here in Kansas and help a lot of families with hog projects, again, at all levels, and placing hogs, getting hogs ready for shows. So really excited to be here with you guys today, be able to talk through a few things. So we'll go ahead and get started and go through a few things and then give some time for some questions at the end. So just going to talk through, I know you guys have been on several sessions of getting ready, getting your projects ready as we get closer to fair time. But really now that we're getting really into kind of the short rows down to the last 30, 45, 60 days, depending on what our target show is, the things that we're going to do to really take our project to the next level as we get really close to show, and then the time that we're at the show as well as show day to get the most out of our projects. So just some things to keep in mind and to consider as we're looking forward to our target shows. First off, what is our target show? We're winding up jackpot season, but as our target show, our county fair, we may be going to a couple county fairs with those projects. Are we going to state fair? Are we going to some national shows later on in the fall? So figuring out what our target show is for those animals. And then with that, the length of those shows. Are we going to a one-day jackpot that we're trying to get our hog ready for? Or this part of the season, more so going to that week-long or at least a few days long county fair. And so figuring out what we need for that. Moving into the hot season, really trying to figure out what the weather is going to be, planning and making sure that we can keep our animals cool and comfortable, knowing what facilities we're going to. If we're going to have to be showing off of our trailers, if we've got a fairly nice facility with good pens, just kind of knowing what we need from that standpoint. And then as we, again, continue going to shows, what's provided. If we're going to shows that maybe have a feed store on grounds, like some of the bigger shows, if our county fair is going to have a show supply trailer available that we can get some of those extra things at. And then always really, really important to know those show rules going forward. And we're going to touch a little bit more on all of these as we go through, but always want to know those show rules, be able to know the big ones. And then it's always great to have a printed copy of those rules in case any questions arise. So we're going to get right into kind of getting ready for our shows, packing, and what we really need to bring and make sure that we have with us. So I know the team sent out a show packing list, and I've got one that I have. Most of those things are the same, maybe a few things that are a little different, but again, for the most part, they're the same. I've got mine split up into two different sections that we'll talk about. This first slide is our at-home basics, things that we're using every day to take care of our pigs at home that we're for sure going to need at the show. Then we'll touch on some of the show extras here in a bit. Really just running through this list. Really important, our feed and our supplements. We got to make sure whether we're going to a one-day show or a week-long show that we have all of our feed, our supplements, our feed pan, water bucket, all those things to keep those hogs healthy and eating and drinking. We don't want to change a bunch of feed, so we want to make sure that we're taking those consistent feed stuffs that we've been using every day at home so we can keep those pigs eating on a consistent diet when we get to the show. Shavings, if you have if you're at a fairgrounds that you can use shavings or some type of bedding in your pens, making sure that you have adequate bedding to get through the show. And then the basics of a whip, soap, scrub brush, your daily conditioners that you're using at home, a stall fork to keep that pen clean throughout the week, fans, electric cords, again, now as we're really getting into that hot time of year to keep our animals cool. Then a water hose. A lot of county fairs don't provide water hoses, so making sure that you've got that hose to use in the wash rack. Then as you can tell, I've got a few pictures here. One thing that I highly recommend, regardless of the level, is some sort of a box or a tote to keep your supplies in. We've got a few different options here. As you can see, the big kind of shiny fancy one is a big hanging show box with a shelf. That's really nice to have, but we definitely don't need anything that advanced or that high dollar if we're just getting into it. A Rubbermaid tow or a little toolbox like what I have shown here also works great, just to be able to efficiently get everything carried in and out of the barn, making sure that we're not dropping stuff along the way. That also helps us get our trailer loaded and unloaded quicker, so we're not holding up the line when everyone else is trying to get in and unloaded our fares. So that's our at-home basics list that I've ran through. Next, we're going to go ahead and talk about our fair time must-haves. These are things that we maybe don't use every day or as often at home, but we're definitely going to want to have these for the most part coming into our show. So a pump-up sprayer or some sort of a spray bottle is great to have to keep pigs cool, get dirt off of them as we're going to the ring and don't have access to a hose really close. I always want to make sure that we have plenty of brushes. I talked about a scrub brush earlier, but making sure that we've got a nice soft brush for the show ring. Clippers, something that if we're just starting out, definitely not a necessity, but as we get a little bit further into the project, if they're allowed at our show, bring in clippers to do some touch-up clipping. And we'll touch on general clipping here in just a bit as well. Looking at show day oils and conditioners, we talked about those daily conditioners at home, still using those through the show, and then also maybe some extra show day shine if that's allowed. Again, we'll touch on that and some show rules here in a little bit. Electrolytes, we talked about how important feed is earlier, keeping those animals on that same consistent base feed. Getting into, again, the hot season, keeping those animals on water, electrolytes are a great thing to help keep your animals hydrated, drinking, and looking their best. Regardless of where you go, zip ties, wire, plier, little gate chains, anything like that are great to have, especially if you're going to a new facility that you're not quite as familiar with. Always want to make sure that we have our paperwork, copies of paperwork, whether it's whether our fair is requiring a CVI or health papers, our breed papers, or pedigrees for our pigs, entry forms, anything like that that we might need going into a show. And always want to make sure we have our show clothes. So definitely something that I would encourage parents to double check that we have, even if our showman says they've packed them. That's something that's always good to double check. If you're going to a fairgrounds that doesn't have great access to electricity, a generator is a great thing to pack if you have one, just so you have it if you need it. And towels, really getting into show season, really like to have towels to get extra dirt off. Really like to use towels to dry those pigs as we're getting ready to show them. I know a lot of times in the summer when it's really hot, we'll just let them kind of air dry, but towels are really handy to have as we're getting closer, like I said, to going into the show ring. So that's just kind of the basics of show day prep and what I would kind of recommend having in your show box and having close. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about all of these as we get a little bit more in depth. So one of the things we're going to talk about is picking a whip to use for the show ring. I know this is something that's probably been touched on a little bit before in some of your sessions that you've been to, but really figuring out the appropriate whip to use for the show ring. And sometimes we use different whips training our pigs at home than we do when we get them into the show ring. So a little graphic here, kind of correct placement and holding your whip, but then really talking about the correct whip that's going to be the most comfortable for the showman and the pig. So you want to get something that's easy to handle. Kind of one of the new fads has been those big golf club grips on show whips. Probably not the best fit for a peewee showman, but getting a grip or a whip again that's comfortable for that showman and that pig to use. You can kind of see that red tasseled whip, something that's great. Those heads up whips to get those pigs driving, get at home. I'm not a huge fan of using them in the show ring because they can collect a lot of chips and shavings on that whip and kind of get tangled up on stuff. So really just figuring out what whip is going to work for you and be the most comfortable. And then again with that, making sure that we don't have a really, really short whip or a really, really long whip. Most showmen will need a whip that's about 36 to 39 inches. There will be a few that'll be the exception of that, but for the most part, 39 to 36 inches is a really good target size for a whip to shoot for your showman. Touched a little bit earlier on wanting to have some clippers, and clipping's a great thing to really take your project to the next level. So definitely, if we're just getting started off, don't have clippers, it's not a necessity, not something that we have to do for our first year at the county fair, but something to definitely work towards. So I really like to use a small set of clippers. You can find them at about any farm store. When we go to clip, making sure that we're doing it in the appropriate manner. So we always like to clip before we go to a show. Sometimes, especially if it's the first time that we're clipping that pig, they can be a little nervous. So we try and do it before we go to the show to lessen that stress, especially. And then again, if we make any mistakes, hopefully it'll give it a little time to grow out. But just a few basics to go by. Talking about clipping bodies, we really want to maintain a minimum of a half an inch. So we don't want to get that hair any shorter than a half an inch. That's really an industry standard for, we talk about hogs going to harvest. If their hair is any shorter than that, they're going to get carcass docks, and it's really just kind of helps them look their best to keep a little bit of that extra hair on them. We talk about clipping their face down, and you can clip their face a little bit shorter, but definitely want to keep that body hair at least a half an inch. I want to make sure that blades are sharp. So if we are clipping with dull blades, that hair is not going to clip as nice. It's going to pull and just be uncomfortable for the pig, and then get everybody upset. So making sure that blades are sharp. We also want to use a guard, and that's about the best way to make sure that we're maintaining the correct hair length is using labeled guards. So I really like using plastic guards. They don't seem to leave lines or marks on the skin quite as bad as maybe some of the metal clipper guards will do. But you can use metal if that's what you got. So any kind of basic guard, you can get them on Amazon or from a local barber shop, or get them through a show supply dealer, farm store. And a 10 blades, one of the most common blades to use with those to get that appropriate hair length, and they cut really, really well whenever we talk about clipping hogs. Always want to make sure that your blades and clippers are oiled often, and disinfect them between uses. Want to disinfect and clean them between every pig, and especially if we're clipping pigs maybe from different farms, maybe your 4-H club is getting together, or your FFA chapter, and we're clipping pigs from different farms. Really want to make sure that we're getting those clippers disinfected. Again, I talked about we like to clip at home. There are a lot of shows that won't let you clip on grounds. That's just a show rule. So making sure that you double check that rule. Even though we do clip at home, we always like to take clippers if it's allowed, to be able to maybe touch up if we missed a spot or need to touch up just a little bit to make that project look better. We like to take those clippers with us to the show, again, if it's approved with your fair rules. All right, I talked a little bit about getting into heat and high stress. And so as we talk about getting to the show, really want to make sure that we're managing stress for pigs. Everybody that's had pigs for very long knows that they don't always handle heat the best, and getting into hot county fair season is really a time that we're really going to have to monitor them. So making sure that they're drinking well, that we're giving them plenty of water, keeping them cool. That might mean taking them to the wash rack every hour to hose them off while we're at the fair. And also supplementing. We talked about electrolytes earlier, and just a few products here that you can use. So there's plenty of other products out here that work. These are just a few that I know of and that I've used. The Pink to Purple is a great electrolyte to use. Shogun and Liquid Boost, those are going to be some kind of stress relief. We actually like to start giving Liquid Boost before we leave the house. We'll give it a few days before we go to a show and feed it through the duration of a show. You can give it in feed or water, just to kind of help that animal feel their best and do their best as we're going through, again, those high stress situations, hauling animals, taking them to a new place. So now that we've kind of got our show box packed, we're got our animal clipped if we're going to, really thinking about what's going to happen. We've got the trailer loaded. We're heading to fair. What are we going to do when we get to the fair, to the fairgrounds and arrive? So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to make sure that we find our pens, especially if it's a fairgrounds that you haven't been to before, or a new show venue, making sure that whatever pen we're stalled at is a good pen, making sure that your latches work. There's nothing worse than being in a hurry and throwing your pig in a pen and then figuring out the gate latches broke. So making sure there's no wires or anything sticking out of that pen, and then getting our pens bedded. Again, if we're allowed to use shavings or chips or any sort of bedding at that show, getting bedding put in place, installing our feeders on the fence if we're going to go ahead and put those in, and and any pin dividers that we need to install. And then as quick as we can, getting those hogs off of a trailer and cooled down. Making sure that you find your electric outlets so we can get fans hooked up if we need to, and locating your wash racks and knowing where those are on the facility. And then another good thing to know is where the show ring is and then where they're going to be posting classes or where they're doing weigh-in at, just so you've got the flow of kind of how the show's going to run and know where everything is. And then again, once we get those animals settled, making sure they're cool and content, making sure we know where the wash rack is to go hose them down, getting access to electricity for fans and things like that, just to keep our animals feeling their best. All right. So once we get our animals settled, and we'll talk a little bit about show day routine and building up to this. It really depends on how long we're going to be at a fair. So I know we talked a little bit about jackpot shows. We may just be pulling in for 1 day or 2 days. If we're talking about going to a county fair, we may be there for 3-4 days, up to a week, or a state fair, or any of our bigger shows. And so as we work up to this, to getting to show day, making sure that we're keeping our animals cool and really feeding on those targeted times that we're already feeding at home to keep those animals on a consistent schedule. So as we get to our show day routine, we're really going to want to run through. I have kind of a show day checklist that I mentally go through. Again, always good to check for those show clothes. There's nothing worse than realizing that you left your lucky show shirt at home or you don't have your belt or your boots. So making sure that we've got all those things. So feeding your normal rations, again, as many things as we can keep consistent for our animals, the better they're going to do, and hopefully the less stress they're going to feel in that new environment. Depending on day, maybe we're starting our show at 8 in the morning, so maybe we have to feed just a little bit early that morning, but still trying to keep our feeding consistent. Or maybe we're feeding the middle or showing in the middle of the day or the afternoon. So that's going to vary a little bit depending on when our show time is. And we'll visit just a little bit more here in a minute about how we're going to gauge those feeding times and then be adding appropriate fill to those animals to make them look the best for the show ring. Again, I talked earlier about making sure you know where your classes are going to be posted. So we're going to check the show order, figure out when you're going to be showing. It happens occasionally. You turn in your cards, you get weighed and everything, and you get left off the show list. So you want to make sure that you go get those checked as soon as they get posted, make sure there's not any issues or errors on that, and then be able to figure out when you're showing. If you're at a 100 head hog show and you're in the very last class of the day and the show starts at 9, you probably don't need to have your pig ready at 9:15. So really kind of being able to figure out when you're going to be showing in relation to when the show starts. Hydrating and filling throughout the day. Again, keeping those pigs eating and looking their best. And as I said, we'll touch on that a little bit more here in a bit. We're going to want to wash and condition day of show. This can be done a little bit earlier in the day, but make sure that we get them a good full body wash, get any dirt on them, and use a good conditioner on them to keep that skin and hair looking fresh. And then we'll use some different conditioners later. Spot wash as needed as we're getting a little bit closer to showtime. Pigs, as anybody that's had them for very long knows, they can get dirty in a hurry. So getting that good wash and condition in a while before the show, and then maybe running them back to the wash rack as we get a little bit closer to time, and just spot washing, maybe if we got some feet or dirt on our face or our legs or belly, and getting that those extra dirt spots washed off. Putting some extra conditioners on, again, if those are allowed by your show. There's some shows that are water only shows, meaning you can only use water. You can't use any other products on your animals. There are oil-free shows, which mean you can use any products that don't contain oil. So really knowing what your show rules are when it goes to putting conditioners or oils or kind of some show shine products on those pigs as we get ready to go into the show ring. And then I always want to make sure that we're ready to go when our class is called, that they're not having to hold the show up waiting on us, that we're there with our pig. We've got our pig ready to go and content. We've got our brush and our show whip ready to go whenever they call for our class. So we're going to talk a little bit here about adding fill. So I know that's a question that a lot of people have, is kind of how should I feed to get my pig ready for the show, or how much should I feed them? Should we give them extra feeding? Should we hold feed? So just want to go through a few things in relation to that. So one of the first things is we're not going to add a bunch of new feed or new supplements when we get to the show. That just goes into keeping that pig comfortable, keeping them on a routine. If we go putting a bunch of new things in, that's probably going to contribute a little bit more to the stress on that pig. So as many things as we can keep consistent, using the same things at home and then using those same things as we go to the show as well. So if we're there for a few days, we're definitely, like I said earlier, going to want to keep those pigs on a consistent feeding schedule as we get a little bit closer to the show. So talking about show day or maybe the night before if it's a morning show, we're really going to start trying to put some added fill into those hogs just to make them look their best. We want them to look full, to look bellied down, but we don't want them to look really big and bloated. So if you're not quite sure, you're saying, well, this is really, we're kind of new to this. We're not really sure how much fill or belly we want on these. Find someone that's got more experience. Maybe it's a breeder that you can simply send a quick picture or a video to and say, hey, do you think this hog looks full enough? Or find someone else around the barn that's got a little bit more experience and ask their opinion on that. We really like to feed small amounts at a time when we start feeding or filling up for a show. So really starting about anywhere from 12 to 6 hours, kind of depending on the show and how much fill we need. Just like us, when we sit down for Thanksgiving dinner, if you put a bunch of feed in front of your pig, they're going to eat it all, especially some of these bigger pigs that we've been maybe holding to get to their appropriate weight at county fair. So we don't want to fill them up really fast. We're going to feed small amounts, so maybe a half pound to a pound or a pound and a half at a time, and really start filling those pigs up as we get a little bit closer to show, feeding them every hour to 2 hours. And with feeding, we really want to make sure that they're still getting plenty of water and electrolytes. So whether you're feeding wet feeds and mixing those in, or just making sure that we're watering and those pigs are getting a good drink every time that we're feeding and starting to fill. Also, feeding those smaller amounts every hour or two allows us to figure out when that pig looks full and take that feed away so we don't get too much fill into that pig. I know another question that gets brought up a lot is bucket watering versus watering out of like a pipe water or a tube water. So this is something that if you're using a tube water at home, or whether it's one that you're filling every day or you've got a plumbed in watering system, we're going to want to make sure that we get our animals trained to drink out of a bucket. So we like to pull water. We actually start this when our pigs are pretty little, but if you haven't, sometimes we'll get to some older pigs that haven't drank out of a bucket. Teaching them to drink out of a bucket at home is really good, and we really like to transition to that at a show. It allows us to monitor a lot better how much that animal is drinking. It allows us to mix electrolytes into that water, and we don't have to put electrolytes into a full tube of water. The pig is comfortable drinking out of a bucket. And sometimes we have those pigs that want to play with their water and make a mess in the pen. That's really not fun to deal with at the county fair when your pig has ran the water and soaked the pen. So bucket watering for us is a more efficient way to make sure that our animals are drinking the right amount, staying hydrated, without kind of the extra hassle of maybe making a mess or not realizing how much water those animals are drinking. So again, really talking about right as we're getting ready for the show ring, making sure that everything's clean on that animal. We've got our animal filled up. We're getting ready for our final wash, making sure that we go over that animal's full body again. We really want to make sure that not only we're just getting the basics of that body wash, this is where towels really come in handy. Getting their ears clean, making sure that their tag is clean if it's got some dirt on it. That's really going to take you to the next level, especially not only in a class, but in showmanship too, making sure that we've gone the extra step to really get our animal clean and looking their best. Deciding what conditioners or spray to use, like I said, if we're going to use any, really knowing our show rules, if we're allowed to use oils or conditioners, and if so, what kind. Applying those shortly before we go in the show ring, and maybe a little water on top of that to make our pigs look their best. Really important to make sure that we have a clean whip and a clean brush. There's nothing worse than getting your pig all shined up, and washed and ready to go, a solid white pig, and you grab a whip that's got some mud on it or someone dropped in the dirt and leave a big brown mark on the side of that pig when you touch them with their whip, or a brush that's got some dirt in it and getting on that pig. So making sure that our whip and brush are clean and ready to go into the show ring. It's always a great idea to have a full spray bottle. We talked about a pump up sprayer earlier to make sure that we have water that we can take to the ring. So if our hog gets hot, that we've got that spray bottle. Whenever we get put into a holding pen, we can get a little water on them, or even give them a drink out of as well. And then if your show uses back tags or exhibitor cards in your pocket, making sure that you have those ready to go into the show ring. All right. And the last thing that we're really going to touch on is knowing your show rules. And so just a few rules that kind of I've seen over the years or things it shows. Talking about, again, product, whether we're talking water only can be applied to those animals, if we can use products that are not oil based, or if we can use kind of any oil product or non-oil product that we want to get some extra shine and condition on those animals. Again, if clippers are allowed at your fair, if we need to do all of our clipping at home, or if we're allowed to do some touch up once we get to the fairgrounds. If you guys have a wet barn where all of your stalls are also your wash racks that drain into an alleyway, you're probably not allowed to use bedding. But if you've got a dry barn or a dry area in your barn where you can use bedding, making sure that we've got adequate bedding so that our pigs are comfortable. Show attire. Some shows will require you to wear a fair shirt or a certain type of shirt. Some shows require you to wear long sleeve shirts. So making sure that we've got our appropriate show attire packed and are ready to go. And then again, that paperwork, making sure that we've got copies of our entries, our registration papers, our vet inspections, if we should need those at our fairgrounds. And then anything else show rule wise that we'll run into. Anything from how many heads you're allowed to show in a class, or making breeds for that show. So making sure, again, it's always great to read through those rules thoroughly and have a printed copy of those rules as we get ready to go to the show. Okay, so that concludes my PowerPoint slides. I'd be glad to take any questions.
All right, so does anybody have questions for Kara or Kara's part of the presentation today? I don't have any in the chat box yet. Anybody have anything for her? Ask you a couple of questions, Kara, that came in on registration.
Yep.
Just to fill a little bit of time and see if anybody comes up with any. So one question that came across registration was, how can I help my son prepare for show day? And that may be a good avenue to kind of discuss, if parents are watching today, what their role should be as the parent versus the exhibitor at those shows.
Yeah, great. And that brings another point that I'll talk about too. So I think it really depends on kind of the age and the experience level of that exhibitor. But I, again, grown up showing, and I help a lot of families and a lot of younger exhibitors. And I think really getting ready for shows is places that we can give kids a lot more responsibility, but still being able to help them out in that regard. So maybe our exhibitor is not quite old enough to do all the feeding by themselves, or get everything packed, but giving them your packing list and saying, hey, do you have everything packed? Letting them kind of take the lead on some of those things and giving them some more responsibility in that regard, making sure that they've got a checklist. They know when they're feeding, when they're checking their animal, they're going to cool their animal down every hour at the show and things like that. And I really think that, again, that's a good way to give those kids some extra responsibility. And as a parent, I think just being able to kind of step back and assist in those situations. Sometimes it's easier for us as parents or coaches to step in and do it ourselves, but really being able to give those kids kind of that responsibility and sense of accomplishment on their own. And being able to have those conversations as we're getting closer to county fair. Okay, do we have enough feed? What do we need to get before we leave to go to the county fair? And a few things like that. And another point that brings me to is some show rules regarding who's allowed to help fit your animal when we get to that show. Making sure that we know if it's only youth are allowed to help fit animals. There's some shows that only another exhibitor, 4-H or FFA exhibitor is allowed to help. The immediate family can help fit those animals once we get to the show, or there's some shows that'll be open fit where anybody can help. So realizing what those rules are and knowing that before we go to the show, knowing what the what our exhibitor's role is and what they're going to be responsible for with their animal once they get to the show, and the things that they're going to need help with once they get there, and figuring out who's going to be able to provide that help. So hopefully that answers that question.
I think so. Another question that I had seen come through registration, one that actually pertains a little bit more to probably now and getting prepared for the show. Do you have any tips and tricks on a couple of pigs that may be buddy sour? And when we say buddy sour, we mean they've probably been pinned together or maybe in pins right next to each other, and they kind of have a tendency of losing their cool when you take one away from the other one. In this particular situation, it seems like they've tried to separate them to eat, and they don't have very good luck with that. So do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, so we've had some like this. I've had some in the barn that have been buddy sour, and some families that I help. And once we get to this point and we're a little bit closer to show season and these pigs are a little bit bigger, we don't have as much time to work with them. Getting them out and getting them drove again as far apart as we can. Sometimes it even comes to the point of where we load one of those pigs up and we take them plumb to the other side of the pasture or the farm and jump them out of the trailer and drive them by themselves to get them away where they don't have the option to be with that other pig. It's definitely not the most ideal, but we've had that situation happen and it works, where you just don't give them the option. You take them completely away from that pig. Or even taking them in a trip around the farm or around the mile to get them just a little bit of distance between those two pigs. Or loading one up in the trailer while we're driving the other one just so they can't see each other, or maybe can't hear each other as well, are some tricks and tips that we've used to kind of prevent that and hopefully get our pigs to drive a little bit better away from each other.
All right, looks like we have a question in the chat. If you use a bucket at the show, how often / when are you pulling the bucket? I assume for watering, correct?
Okay, yeah. So when we water at a show, we never leave water buckets in, just for the fact of pigs spilling them and they're making a mess. So we water depending on how hot it is. When it's really, really hot, we're watering probably every 30 minutes to an hour at least, especially as we're getting ready for show. And again, when it's really, really hot, or at least checking on those pigs and offering a drink. So again, we never leave them in, but we're going to be going through and offering them quite a bit. Just for a fact that we don't want those animals to spill. We don't want them to drink a whole lot of water all at once. We want to come in, offer them a really, really good drink, and then pull that bucket out for a little while so they're not getting tripped up in it. They're not catching a leg on a handle or spilling that bucket in the pen.
I would second Kara's comment on that. You know, we typically don't leave buckets in the pen either, and it's more so just making sure you're giving them the opportunity to drink as much as needed, depending on weather, but also, you know, even if it's a really nice day, we probably don't go longer than an hour between offering them a drink. And depending, you know, if it's one that you think needs a little bit more belly as you get really close to showtime, you know, you may, if the weather allows, hold off a little bit closer to showtime and maybe hope that they'll take a bigger drink before, but that all kind of depends too on how they've been drinking throughout your time at the fair too. So looks like there is another question. If there is a tube waterer built into the pen, should I still bring a bucket to water?
So I'm guessing you mean like your fairgrounds provides tube waterers already in the pens. Is kind of what I'm taking that as. I would highly recommend bringing a bucket. Not only from, and like I talked about, ease of watering, you know how much those animals are drinking. But if you're going to be using that water, I would highly, that provided water, I would highly recommend disinfecting it before you use. Just from a biosecurity standpoint, a disease standpoint, you don't really know who's had pigs in there before, if there's been pigs in there recently, or if there's any dirt or anything that's got down in there. So if you're going to use it, I think I would highly, highly recommend using a disinfectant on that. That's still going to be safe for your pigs to drink after. But again, still recommend using the bucket rather than a tube water when we get to fair.
Hey, Kara, this is a question, and if you have an opinion, then go ahead and share it. If not, we may have to resort to another source. But how can I beef up our pig? Ours is still long and narrow. So do you have any mass addition recommendations?
Yeah, so as we're getting kind of closer to fair time, thinking most of our county fairs are going to be starting here within probably 20 to 40 days. I think this is the time that we're really going to start kind of pushing those pigs or fine tuning our feedings. And so if you've got a pig that's bigger and narrower, especially maybe trying to add muscle, or maybe we've got them on a finishing diet, we've pulled that protein down, maybe have them on a little fat, maybe we're going to go back from that a little bit and beef up our protein just a little bit in our diet that we're feeding. Depending on how fat that pig is in relation, maybe even still go to feed some fat if we're needing to belly that pig down and just give them some more dimension and some fill, some natural fill and through their center body and stuff. But as we start to get these pigs on a kind of more of a finishing diet with that lower protein, if we're feeling like we don't have enough protein in that diet, being able to either increase the protein in that feed or maybe even some high protein additives. And that's another good question, that if you've got a breeder that you trust, or maybe that you've got your pigs from, or somebody else in your county that's more experienced, that you can get pictures or videos or have come look out at your hog and help with some feeding advice, that would be my best recommendation.
I would agree with Kara on that as well. A lot of times, and I've said this before in prior sessions, a lot of times, the breeder, whoever you got those pigs from, knows their genetics very well, and they're able to help you fine tune those animals based on prior experience with that bloodline or those genetics. So that's always a great resource to have in your back pocket, along with extension agents or swine project leaders or FFA advisors or feed reps that you deal with to purchase feed from. So always keep those people handy. And especially if there's somebody that you can have come out and look and see them in person, or send videos to, because those are very helpful for whoever might be answering those questions. Anybody else have questions for Kara? I think Kara's gonna hang on with us throughout the rest of the Zoom. So if you come up with any, just drop them in the chat box and we will for sure cover them here after a little bit. But I think we'll go ahead and move on to the next section of our session today. And that will be our judges panel. So we have 3 guests joining us today, and I'll give them each the opportunity to introduce themselves real quick. But they are going to kind of cover the judge's point of view for us at the county fair and kind of give us a little bit of an insight as to what they might be looking for in the show ring. And not just necessarily at the county fair, but really, any show that we might see them at. So we have Chris Mullinex that'll join us. We have Kyle Beatty, as well as Brianna Thompson. And I think we might try to get them pinned to the front and center here. But I will let them go ahead and introduce themselves real quick.
I guess I'll start if you want. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, guys. My name is Chris Mullinex, and I'm faculty member in animal science here at Kansas State University. Also coach our collegiate livestock judging team, and have had the great opportunity to judge probably a number of your county fairs over the years, but quite a few across the state and in other states as well. And excited to be here, share some of our thoughts from a judging perspective, and share some of the insight that the 3 of us have, 2 other great individuals that I know quite well on here with us. So.
I guess I'll go second. Introducing myself, Kyle Beatty from Southeast Nebraska. My wife and I, we run about 80 sows, specializing in breeding stock and show pigs. judge a number of shows throughout the course of a year. So excited to be here. Turn it over to Brianna.
Thanks, Kyle. Brianna Thompson. I actually grew up in Indiana, but my husband is a Kansas native. So I grew up judging livestock at Blackhawk East and Purdue University. And then my husband and I continue to raise show pigs. So work very closely alongside the folks at Platt Show Pigs. And Austin and I continue to go to shows across the country and also judge across the country as well. So look forward to the discussion this afternoon.
All right, great. So we'll go ahead and start out with our first question. We'll just dive right into it. And the first question that I'll ask you, you guys can kind of go around in a rotation, however, whoever wants to answer first and answer this, but we'll give each of you the opportunity to do that. So first off, can you describe your ideal image of a show pig and or what traits are you looking for most on show day? This can be, you know, if you want to separate market from breeding, or if you want to just roll it all together, you can answer that however you'd like.
Chris, I can kick us off and then you can add anything that I may miss along the way. But I would say, so regardless of species or whether it's the market side or breeding side, I would say that when I'm judging shows, really the biggest priority for me is ensuring that structure reads right. So really just starting from the ground up on those animals and making sure that they read right in their angles. So they're able to get out with a lot of flex and reach off both ends of their skeleton. They're square coming and going. So I would say that whenever you're purchasing your animals, I would also just kind of use that as a starting point as well. I think that's a very strong indicator as you move down the line, how you're going to be able to feed that one. Are you going to be able to push them hard? Or are you going to have to be a little bit, have a bit more management as far as endpoint there as well? And then after that, look and balance. Do they proportion right? Does everything match? Just in terms of from the profile, that's another area. And then after that, just in terms of muscle and shape, does everything fit? Are they fresh? So when you study them up high, do they have plenty of shape and turn out of the backside of their shoulder? Are they square when they go away? So I would say, long story short, from my end, the biggest priority is structure, and everything after that, I like to say is extras as far as muscle and look and design. But that's kind of my biggest priority would be structure.
Yeah, I think Brianna makes some spectacular points, and I think probably all three of us will be in agreement. But one thing that I would caution you, I know a lot of new exhibitors. You know, I think sometimes when we get on to, you know, events like this and we talk to three judges that may think similar, I would caution you to understand that every judge is probably going to have a slightly different opinion as far as the order of priorities. But I would echo what Brianna said in saying that, to me, regardless of whether we're judging breeding stock or market hogs, to me, those traits that equate to basic production value are always going to be the things that I start with. And I know the question revolves around what are you looking for on show day or in a show pig? And yes, I certainly want my grand champion of any event to have those extras that Brianna talks about. But in the process of getting to that point, and especially in the process of young exhibitors, young families that are just getting started, I think it becomes maybe a little too easy to be enamored by some of those extras and not truly understand where I, Brianna, other judges, Kyle, you know, are going to start our priorities. And you know, to me, the greatest of show pigs that I've ever seen were great because they started with fundamentals first, and then we happened to get those extras. But certainly, I want hogs that are sound at their foundation. I want hogs that have some genuine skeletal width and some muscularity to them, especially as we talk about market hogs. But they need to be able to handle that in the right kind of skeleton. And then hopefully once we get to the upper level of certain shows, we add a little more show ring appeal and balance and attractiveness to the puzzle also. But I will definitely echo what Brianna said, and the thought that it starts with basic production value, and that I think regardless of breeding or market animals, they better be sound in their feet and leg structure. Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement with both of those two, and I think a number of people that judge and like both of them said, I mean, you're going to get some differences, and that's I guess the aspect that's both frustrating and good to catch-22 is that there are differences in opinion, and there is no exact measurements as to what is enough and what's not. It's kind of a pieces of the puzzle and how they fit together. I mean, in terms of skeleton and soundness, I mean, I like them as wide at the ground as they are up high. I'm a big angles to their skeleton from the side, regardless of species. I think that helps balance and proportions and extras. And I don't know, I may be a little bit different. I mean, in regards to, I'm okay giving up in an area or two if there's an area or two where they're far superior, as opposed to everything just being okay. If you're unique, you know, in terms of look or bone, and maybe you're not as wide, but you still are above the threshold of, you know, okay, or even just below okay. So maybe a little bit different perspective on that. Which one's harder to make?
Kyle, and I would even add, I think that's a good point. And I think even, you know, as Chris mentioned, as far as where you start and then on show day, I think that's one good thing that, you know, when those first few classes go into the ring, I would always, you know, have exhibitors go up to the ring and see what judges are focusing on as far as talking points. What are some of the advantages that their class winners have? And that can also help correlate, you know, do we need to feed a little bit more electrolytes to get a bit more shape and turn up high? Is fill okay? You know, so the things that you can control at the end of a bucket on show day, I think, you know, just go up and watch the judge and see what their preferences are. But I think to Kyle and Chris's points as well, just structure, ensuring that just the basics are met, and then everything after that for a lot of people are extras and personal preference.
And I might throw one more thing in there. I love what Kyle talked about. And I think this is something that exhibitors are not maybe discussing a lot on a regular basis, or don't ever have the opportunity to talk about. I think one point that's very, very important to understand is that every show is different, and every set of animals that are available for that judge to select from is different on that given day. You know, and because of the pieces that Kyle talked about, judging livestock is very subjective. It's not a black and white decision. You know, you could run the same, you know, 100 market hogs tomorrow in a show to a second judge and get a completely different opinion. And a lot of it revolves around where those thresholds are for a certain judge. And, you know, when Brianna and I and Kyle talk about the importance of structure, I think some people make the mistake and think that that means then no matter what, whatever the best structured pig is at the next show, that the three of us are going to use that pig to win. And, you know, like Kyle mentioned, it's so important that you understand there's multiple things that we're evaluating simultaneously. And yes, structure is at the forefront of that decision for me. But once they meet an acceptable threshold for that, I'm looking for other things also. And it is about blending those things together. And it is the thing early in a show career for families that is very, very difficult to understand, because it would be a whole lot simpler if it was black and white.
Yeah, and I think structure oftentimes is kind of a broad term that we use, but when you do it enough and kind of break down structure, it's probably the most argued in regards to a, you know, a broad spectrum characteristic. I mean, muscle can be measured at times, but structure, when you talk about angles to shoulder, knee, pasterns, length of stride out of the shoulder, are they elevated because they're straight shouldered, or are they naturally tall fronted and run uphill? How does the length of hip equate to how much reach and range of motion have off the rear to their hawk? They flex their hawk, or is it one rigid joint? I mean, are they soft? Sometimes you'll hear, pastern, are they coon footed? So that's where, structure is very subjective, like Chris and Brianna mentioned, and how one moves is all of those joints and angles at the same token, and where one preferences angles, one might like one stronger pastern. So that's where it's probably the one that gets argued the most, in my personal opinion. So
Yeah, Kyle, and I would even say that sometimes if you have to call, you hate to say it, but if you have to call one good enough in one area to get those extras, and it's all, to Chris's point, a matter of personal opinion and what's in the show. So I think that's a kind of we could go on and on, I would say, about just personal preference and what our priorities are. But I think a lot of it is the cards that you're dealt and that given day.
All right, so if you guys are good on that question, I think we'll head on to the next one. What are your priority traits within a top showman? So for showmanship, what are your biggest concerns from the judge's standpoint?
I would say this one could be a little bit controversial, but I would say that when Austin and I are helping kids get ready for a show, to us, showmanship in an actual showmanship contest and showing an actual hog in class are two different things. To us, I think in showmanship, from my end, you're wanting to try to give as many views as you can of a hog be in the right spots at the right time. Whereas in an actual class, if you have a narrow chested one, we're not going to tell kids to drive right out of the gate and go in and give a chest shot. So I think as far as in a specific class, showing the best attributes of your pig. And that's one thing that before you go into a ring for a specific class is something that you should be cognizant of. If that's asking the breeder or asking your parents, what are the best things about my animal that you should be cognizant of before you go into the ring. But in showmanship, at least from my perspective, a lot of it is using the ring space that you have. So taking smooth and wide turns and not pivoting your hog on their rear two or their hind leg. And then just finding those open holes and not getting caught up in the cluster of other showmen, but also having show ring etiquette as far as not driving your pig into other animals in the show ring or cutting kids off. So I think it's a mixture of a lot of little things. But I would say the biggest preference from my end would be being cognizant of what the best things are about your animal and being able to show those things the most.
Brianna, I might add something to that. And this maybe is so that some of the maybe beginners, early families understand a little about what Brianna's talking about, and something that's probably would bring up a little bit pet peeve of mine in showmanship. I agree with what Brianna is saying, that there is some differences, but don't mistake that for thinking you should have a different demeanor or a approach to showmanship in a regular class than in showmanship. And that's something that I see a lot, is that young people, for whatever reason, think they have to crank up their level of intensity, 10 times when they come back out for showmanship, and they overdo it. I think it's important to stick to your approach. And that's one thing I love about judging showmanship is I think you can find a comfort zone in the way that you do things, as long as you accomplish the goals that I think are on that checklist, so to speak. In showmanship, I'm not so sure that all young people have to approach it exactly the same way. But if I'm thinking about things that are important to me in showmanship, it is, first of all, showmanship happens at home, not in the ring in that moment. I know Kara just talked to you a little about preparation, and getting ready even on show day. To me, the best showmen have covered every single detail before they enter that ring. And that is preparation of the animal, cleanliness of the animal, but also it happens at home in the fact that you don't show up at your county fair and expect that barrel of gilt to drive perfectly for you if you haven't put the hours in at home. And that was something, you know, when I was growing up showing pigs, we didn't do a lot of that. And you know, we learned the further we went along, and my brothers and I show career that, boy, if we wanted to get a leg up on other people, then it was how much more work we put in. And we started driving pigs daily, you know, before it was maybe popular to drive them daily. And you know, that's something that I would encourage you as parents to really go find those families who've been doing it for a long time, and don't be afraid to ask those kind of questions. Have them come over, have them help you start right now. Even if your county fair is 6 weeks away, you know, you should be starting to you know, to do those things so that you're prepared when you enter showmanship. But you know, when you do enter that ring, a lot of the work already should be done. I will say, from the minute you enter the ring, I am a big judge, or a one that is going to take a look at that young person the minute they enter the ring. And I'm probably already making some quick judgments. Do they seem to have that balance of, you know, intensity and yet a calm that needs to happen in the show ring? Do they understand how to position themselves? Do they put themselves in a spot to get the best look possible as often as possible? And do they have the right equipment in hand? And are they courteous to the other exhibitors and the judge as they're in that ring? I think those are things that we probably all would agree on, that are pretty similar across the board.
Yeah, I would agree with what's been said already. I mean, by and large, the most part is what's the engagement when you come in? I mean, do you have good eye contact? I'm a big stickler on cleanliness of the project. When they come in, always keep the hog between myself and the exhibitor. You know, make sure you've got a brush. The last couple of shows I've judged, there's been a couple kids. I mean, that's an easy thing to nitpick, and from a judge's perspective, you know, that's basically what we're looking for. Even if we are normally positive people, you got to be pretty hard. I might be a little bit different in my showmanship mindset. Is my idea of a good showman is giving me all angles, regardless of how good or bad that hog is, from an aspect of I am purely judging the exhibitor. And, you know, big picture, you'd like to think they understand the holes or the weaknesses of their project, but I'm not necessarily looking at their project. I'm looking at their ability, like Brianna said, to find holes and go not necessarily against the grain, but that's the term I'm going to use. If there's a big gap, you know, beat everybody there. Be aware of where you are in the ring. You know, ideally, my mindset is 10 to 15 feet away from me, you know, going back and forth and driving both to and away from me. Because big picture, when it comes down to selecting showmanship versus whether it's market or breeding, if we want to see something, we're gonna make you do it anyway. So you might as well show us you have that ability in showmanship, as opposed to maybe trying to hide it or be a little more discreet. Whether, you know, if one's narrow chested, you know, maybe you try to not bring it right towards me. Well, in showmanship, I'd like to see you have that ability to do that, as opposed to never show me a chest view the entire time. So
I would also say, Kyle, to that point, in judging shows, a lot of the times if the kid is very obvious about what they're trying to hide, it honestly accentuates the problems that they don't want you to see. So I would say, even to that point, you know, to Chris's point, find the kids that do showmanship very well and utilize them as a mentor. Watch them show what are the things that they're doing well. How did they learn how to do that? So always, I'm a very strong proponent of utilizing others that do things extremely well and using them, you know, to ask questions or essentially just learn from the best. And don't be afraid to ask questions when you're at those shows as well.
other point I would make, Brianna talked a little bit about this. I would assume, based on the demographics of the group, again, that we've got a lot of first year or early showmen, young showmen and families that are part of this today. And the one thing that my parents just insisted on my brothers and I doing when we were growing up was, if we were not in the first showmanship class of the day, then we went and watched the first showmanship class of the day. And it taught us a lot about how that judge was going to utilize the ring, what were their expectations. Obviously, the three of us and most judges are going to look for some relatively similar things, but you may never know what that extra detail is that particular judge on that day is looking for. And just watching older exhibitors and listening to that judge on that day, can help you prior to when it's time for you to enter the ring. And I'm not saying that you need to all of a sudden wholesale adjust to the things that you're doing as you get ready to walk in the ring, but if there's a specific view that a judge makes it very clear they're trying to see, and you hear them mention it a couple of times, then those are things you can share with your children as you're sitting and watching those first couple classes, so that they're aware as they enter the ring. I think that's simply using your time wisely and learning. And the other thing we used to do is, there were 3 county fairs that were about the same time as mine growing up, that we went to the neighboring county fair and watched their hog show one evening. Again, why? Well, we want to pick up pointers. We want to see how it happens, especially in our first year. I thought that was a great resource for me, was to just see how a show happens and how that judge utilizes the ring. So, take that time with your young people, and I think it'll teach you a lot as far as what the expectations of that judge on that given day is in the ring.
All right, excellent points, guys. And I think we'll head on to the next question here. What are any questions that you would use as a judge during showmanship, or would recommend exhibitors prepare for in a showmanship competition?
I'll start this one, guys. First of all, I will tell you, for me personally, it is a showmanship competition. It is not quiz bowl. I'm not going to spend 45 minutes out there just quizzing you on the project. But at the same token, I'm not going to tell you I don't ask questions. But I think sometimes when I see or hear, people ask those kind of questions, I wonder if they're waiting until 30 minutes before the show and they're going to sit down, at their pen, and they're just going to try to memorize a few possible answers of questions that a judge could ask. And that to me almost defeats the purpose of doing this project. And I guess when I ask questions in a show, I hope they're questions that revolve around basic knowledge of your project, that are things that I hope we're teaching every day as these young people are going through the growth of the project itself. So, basic knowledge of your animal, what breed is it? What does it weigh? Things like, what do you feed your hog? Obviously, I think one that is relatively popular, especially, depending on age, is how do I read an ear notch? What is an ear notch? Just simple things relative to the swine project. Again, I'm not a big question asker, but I will. And I think it's important that you understand your project. But at the same token, we're going to put our primary emphasis, or I'm going to put my primary emphasis on your showmanship skills. But hey, lots of showmanship are very, very close. And if it comes down to 2 young people that I could flip a coin between, and one of them seems very knowledgeable of their project, then they're certainly going to get the upper hand. So, I would encourage you. I don't know if there's any way to know with certainty what that judge is going to ask. And what I will promise you, when I ask questions in a show, I actually share it with the audience immediately after I ask the question, because I'm not going to ask the same thing to the next group. It's too easy to walk back in the barn and start memorizing something. So, just work with your young people, work with your project leaders, your county agents, your your FFA advisors, whoever it is, to just gain a strong basic knowledge. And the other thing I would say is my questions are going to fit the age of the young person too.
Yeah, I think just to echo some of Chris's thoughts, I myself am not a huge questions asker. I think if you can get one exhibited, that certainly helps separate things. But to Chris's point, if it does come down to asking questions as far as it being close on ability to get a hog driven, I think to Chris's point as well, it's going to match that specific age group. And I think Kara made the point at the beginning of the call, a lot of these things start well before you're even entering the show ring. So a lot of the questions that judges are going to ask, I think, are going to correlate to how, what you've been doing to get your pig ready. What's the ear notch? What are you feeding? What does your pig weigh? I think in some of the older divisions, what's the pedigree? What's it out of? And that's really one that I think correlates to some of the older groups, is just having a bit more knowledge of, who bred your pig, if you raised it, what's it out of. But I think even to Chris's point, skin and hair and presentation, I think for showmanship especially, separates a lot of kids very early as far as a first impression when they hit the ring. Not only how their hog is presented, but also what's the exhibitor's demeanor. And I think when it comes down to questions, at least from my end, it's usually a very close decision, and it comes down to the questions that match that specific age group. So, if it's a younger division, as far as you're just getting started, what breed is your pig? What's the ear notch? Some of those very, very fundamental things. But I think a lot of it just depends on what specific age group you're in as well.
Yeah, I used to be a diehard question asker, like minimum 3 questions to every exhibitor. As I've progressed in the last 10 years, I've kind of gravitated more towards the ability to adapt and overcome physically, as opposed to mentally knowing as much. Questions I do ask, just what Chris said pretty much, and Brianna. A younger kid, I'm really pretty basic. Does your pig have a name? It's pretty just to get them excited, want to come back. When I was growing up, I had a guy ask me, what's the percentage of water of a lean ham? I have no idea the answer to that question. I thought it was more of my ability to get one shown. I'll do other things to trip you up. I'll have kids switch pigs, and I'm looking for you to drive them to your pigs. Do you control the gait coming out and maintain eye contact? I think is more important than how much percentage of water is in a loin. If you want to ask length of a loin or parts of a hog, bacon, just to try and see some kids get nervous, just to kind of calm them down, I think that's a good thing. Don't show behind me. That drives me nuts. I don't care if you answer every question. If you have a sour attitude and act like you don't want to be there, I don't care if you know everything about your pig. Be courteous. So, that kind of feeds into what we were talking about from a phenotypic standpoint, what we look for. It's all got to fit. Nobody's going to do everything right 100%. And I really enjoy evaluating showmanship. And it's kind of a lose-lose, because we try and, as judges, focus on 10 or 12 individuals at one time, as opposed to, like, my son, when he shows, I focus on one kid. So I don't know if that answers the question as to what needs to know, but what those other two said, if you have just the basic knowledge and you show the socks right off of it, you'll do great.
I will say on those questions, as parents start to help young people, learn things, also help them to understand not just what the answer is, but why that's the answer. We think about things like ear notches. Well, I've had a lot of kids have the ability to come in. I say, what are the ear notches of your pig? And they say 4-3. And then I ask, well, what's that mean? And they look at me, deer in headlight, and So, and actually, I'll be honest, if it gets into some questions anymore, especially in the senior edition, I won't even ask them what their ear notches are. I'll take them to someone else's pig and ask them to tell me what the ear notches are on that pig, just to see if they truly understand the concept, not so much just the ability to regurgitate a pre-recorded answer, so to speak. And, so that's my thought is, to me, I'll sometimes even answer or ask a question that may have multiple answers or no real wrong answer. And it's more about the interaction with the young person, being comfortable, thinking logically, not just saying, I don't know, immediately, but sometimes just, taking that time to think a little bit on your feet and answer with something that makes a little bit of sense. But but I'm back to, the point. I will tell you right now, if there's a lockdown easy winner in a showmanship division, that's probably the time I just don't even ask the questions, because they've already separated themselves on other things.
And I would also say that, it's something that is a lot of times overlooked as far as getting ready for a show, but being respectful and cordial in the show ring will get you very, very far, at least from my perspective. I hate to talk about pet peeves, but one of my big pet peeves, whether it's showmanship or an actual class, is as kids are still entering the ring, just let those kids continue to come in and, try not to cut kids off as they're coming in. That's their time to kind of give their first impression and go from there. So I would say even just being cordial and respectful to other kids in the ring, that'll get you a long ways from my end as well.
Second that.
Brianna, Kyle, Brianna, either one of you, I'd like to hear your opinion on this too. And this may be a little bit that extension can help to make sure this is done one way versus the other. But I will tell you right now, especially in recent years, I do love, as a showmanship judge, those shows that give me the opportunity to nod for one person to come in the ring at a time, so that I can get a view, they can give me a look. And then, I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on, kind of what in some circles has become very popular, in that young person then, driving maybe to, behind that judge for, a second or whatever, to let that next person get their individual view. And then we have some county shows that literally open the gate and 20 kids and pigs run in together. I think I enjoy that opportunity of getting that, even if it's just a quick 10-second quick appraisal of that showman coming in by themselves. And then maybe what your guys' thoughts are on what that showman, if they allow that, what should that showman do after they've gotten their individual look?
Yeah, Kyle, I can kick us off there. Chris, so during my time in Florida, I became very, very familiar with the no holding pin system. So a lot of the kids would come into the ring all at once.
Yep.
And I think that's one time where, if you are put in that situation, it's a good time to separate yourself. I would say, if that is what opportunity you have to get into the ring, don't be the one that's trying to push past exhibitors. I would also encourage folks to, if you are in that situation, to try to be the last one to come into the ring. And I think there was a question that came through on the chat. And again, this is just personal preference. There was a question that came into the chat as far as, should junior exhibitors be expected to park your pig? That's not something that I'm going to ask or have kids of that age group do as far as, an exercise in the show ring. But I do think that as you're entering a class or a champion drive, if you're one of the first ones that is going into the ring and there's 6 or 7 other gilts or bears coming in, we strongly suggest that kids, just get out of the way, park your pig, and don't overdrive them if you're not needed to. So I think that's at least personal preference from my end, is that. And even if in showmanship, it's not something that bothers me if a kid is wanting to be cognizant of not overdriving their hog when there's still kids coming in and the judge is taking time to look through, that 10 to 12 kids per class. I think it's just show ring knowledge of not wanting to overdrive your pig. And some folks may have differing opinions, and that's perfectly fine. But just sharing from my perspective, I honestly commend kids that are aware of not over driving and just kind of hanging back for a little bit until everyone gets into the ring, and then firing back up and going at it. So Kyle, I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's kind of my personal preference as far as allowing everyone to get into the ring, give your good first impression, and then just kind of hang back for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be by and large in agreement with Brianna on that. I mean, to Chris's point, from the shows, from the size of shows that we do, sometimes it's you open a 16-foot bull gate and here comes a wave of 16, 10. And in an ideal situation, I honestly don't care either way, whether they come in one at a time. A big first impression takes a split second. And if it's, one at a time right after the other, or it's 10 or 12 through a big open hole, you could elevate yourself very quickly if there is 10 or 12 of you, just with your engagement and eye contact, and I call it your body language. Are you engaged, or are you falling around looking at the stars? I mean, in a group of 10 or 12, if there's 3 of you that are actually understand where I'm at, we suddenly have, a top 3 just off the bat that quickly. But I do like the balanced approach of one at a time, if possible. The park and the pig, I mean, what Brianna said, same thing, short and sweet. What she said, same feelings.
I will back up something that Kyle just said, and this is regardless of what species I might be judging. I think all 3 of us would probably tell you that within the first 10 seconds of watching someone enter the ring, we probably already know whether they have a chance to win showmanship or not. And it is 100% about the things that Kyle just mentioned: engagement, body language, eye contact, poise, professionalism. I mean, you see it, and you see it quickly. Now, that doesn't mean, that they may not go on to make enough mistakes that they get beat. But I can tell you that, I probably can narrow down who might win showmanship within the first 10 seconds of seeing all of them. And that's important. That's a life skill, guys. And I think it's something that showmanship can teach us all. Fair or unfair, people are judging you, and judging you quick. And you have to know how important that initial impression is, because digging yourself out of a hole is a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, Chris, and I would even say that, to your point, that even extends outside of the show ring, whether that's going in for an interview or trying to land a job. First impression in life is a lot of things, and I think that's something that you can learn a lot of when you're entering the show ring, in terms of confidence, and just acting like you want to be there and you want to win will get you a long ways as well.
All right, I couldn't agree more on those. And so we were kind of touching on show ring etiquette with the idea of making your entrance, to get in the ring, and kind of hanging out behind while everybody else has the opportunity to enter. And I think one of the questions we had in the chat box was just a little more of your guys' opinion on general show ring etiquette, such as maybe closing your gates and all those types of things. If you guys wanted to briefly hit on any other etiquette pieces that you have in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think you always need to shut your gates, and it's a little bit subject to what kind of gates, depending on, I mean, some shows the gates are impossible to close if you're like a peewee or a real young kid. And even some of the older ones that I've seen have struggled just to get pins out. Effort goes a long way. I'm big on always controlling the kids that can come out of a gate and never have their hand leave their gate and can control their pig where it doesn't go racing across the ring. I think is very, I mean, if you have that kind of command of a project without a halter or lead rope that you can literally keep it next to you while you are able to multitask and close another gate. I mean, that feels like that friction that's very, very hard to overcome. And then, you know, kind of what Brianna said about, you know, make sure everybody, if you're first in the ring, I mean, give those other kids the same opportunity. And I don't need you cutting them off while they're coming out of their gate, you know, kind of stay behind me and give everyone an equal opportunity. I don't know about what else there is etiquette. I mean, don't be a jerk. It's really pretty simple. I mean,
moral of life. Don't be a jerk.
yeah, like
Kyle.
if you don't want somebody to do it to you, why would you do it to them? I mean, it's an equal opportunity ring. I mean, it does not matter what you spent on that pig. I mean, having high character and being a decent human being is really pretty cheap, and everyone has the ability to do it. So show me you can do it.
That's awesome. And with that, I would also say that, and Kyle, Chris, this may be one of your big, you know, pet peeves as well, but I am all for trying to get your pig's head up. And if that's something that's natural to them and has been worked on leading up to a fair, that's awesome. I would also say that be cognizant that if your pig isn't wanting to drive because you're trying to get their head up, that's one thing that, especially in showmanship, just being cognizant of what your animal can do versus what you think they should be doing. If that's not something that you've been, you know, working on doing throughout the summer to get your hog ready, in the show ring isn't quite the time to try it out for the first time. So I would say if you can get your pig's head up and, you know, present, that's certainly something that helps separate kids. But if it's not something that's natural, I wouldn't try to push it and then whip that. And at that same time, I would say that being whip happy is something that I use a lot of as far as over driving or, you know, hitting other people's pigs. I think to Kyle's point, as far as being respectful, if I have someone that's, you know, animal husbandry is something that folks that have no affiliation to the livestock industry that may be standing ringside and see someone overusing their whip on a pig, that can do a lot of damage. So I would also say that as a parent, be cognizant of just whip utilization. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but that's something that I think can get a lot of folks in trouble as far as just overusing whips at a county fair.
I'm glad, Brianna, I was going to actually bring that point up, and it's without a doubt probably the biggest thing that I see at you know, all levels of shows. But my goodness, if your hog is driving exactly where you want it and the head carriage is like you want it, why in the world do we continue to overly utilize, you know, the tool in hand? It's a tool, it's not a weapon. So, you know, use it to help you. But I agree. Over utilization of the whip is something that I think we got to find that happy balance of. The other thing, I love what Kyle said, and every show's different, but I will tell you, you know, a lot of shows, showmanship will be after maybe the market show or in between the market and the breeding show or something like that, where many of these young people have entered the ring once or twice or 3 or 4 times before they even go into showmanship. Being a good human being does not happen with the flip of a switch. And if you were a jerk, so to speak, throughout the course of the regular day, and you walked into showmanship and just chose to do it differently, then I think we all remember. I will tell you, I'm always judging showmanship. I'm always judging showmanship because I love watching good showmen. You know, I'm drawn to them. I think those that have, you know, a natural instinct in the ring are fun to watch. So I'm evaluating showmanship at all times during the show, whether it's called showmanship or not. I'm still evaluating what you're doing. And I want you to, you know, have that same mental approach. I want you to have that same professionalism, regardless of what part of the show, you know, it may be in. And I want you to show me that you're a worker. And, you know, we talk about pen and pigs. I do think it's important to get that gate if possible, or at least show the attempt to. The other thing I'll tell you is if I put you in a pen, it's not your time to take a nap. and I see that a lot where they pen their pig and then they just jump up and sit on the fence and wait until the judge motions them to come back out. There's, especially these summer county fairs, man, somebody should be right over there for you to hand you a water bottle. You should, give that hog a drink, mist them down, brush them, but show me that you still want it. Not just this is your chance to relax in the pen. I like to look at you when you think I'm not looking at you, and just see what you're doing. And I think that's, again, I think that's a great life skill, but I that's another little piece of the puzzle that I think some people don't think about.
Yeah, if you keep it simple for maximum efficiency, like Brianna said, if you're going and everything's working well, why go and make extra effort? Something else that I wanted to touch on is, and I see it a lot of times in what Chris said, it's not the first time through the ring for a number of these pigs, and they figure out where the holes are, where the exit gate is. That kind of works hand in hand you got to remain calm. And if I'm a big don't use your hands person, but I'm a bigger don't go whip crazy on them. And if a pig goes in a corner, don't use your knees, but reach down with a hand and cover the eye and shield them away and push them off the fence that way, as opposed to get whip happy, I guess. And we'll leave it at that. Work smart, not hard, I think is a good idea to try and maintain.
So with Kyle's hand comment, I think that we'll wrap up your panel with that question, and you guys can answer that as you'd like. But that was one thing that we had turned in as registration question. What are your thoughts as a judge on use of hands in the show ring? Because it is kind of becoming a little more lenient, I think, than when I was showing hogs. We were told you absolutely did not use your hands. And so I think that it's a changed world for sure. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think to Kyle's point, if your hog is starting to ride the gate or go into the corner, I think I'm perfectly fine with you bending down and using your hands. One thing that I see a lot of is, sometimes kids have the tendencies to want to rest their offhand on their pig. That's one thing that I'm a bit more, I'm a bit more of a stickler of. Another thing is I'm perfectly fine if you want to hold a brush in your offhand. I would say that one thing that can get some kids in trouble, not only in showmanship, but also in the actual show, is when they want to start using that brush and rest it on a hog's hip. That not only throws off the balance of the pig, they kind of want to duck their pins and get a bit underneath themselves. So I think it's more of, if it's a time where you don't need to use it, as far as bending down and trying to get your hog off of a gate or keep them from, a lot of times at county fairs, there is a chance that hogs can fight. So if you're trying to get your hog away from another one, perfectly fine with me. I think it's more so when it's an offhand that you don't have a use to have it there is more the pet peeve of mine.
It's showing my age probably a bit, but growing up, I will tell you, if there were two ways to get eliminated from swine showmanship, it was to not close your gate or put your hand on your pigs. And I don't know where that started. And quite honestly, there might very well be judges out there that still believe in those things, especially on the hand side of things. Again, to me, it goes back to go watch the first class. And if you hear a judge specifically say, I don't ever want to see you put your hands on your pig, then I would suggest that you don't do it. But for me personally, I'm one of those that is 100% in agreement with Kyle and Brianna here, that if the time's appropriate and your hands help you to accomplish what you need to get done in that moment, then I'm all for it. I'm especially this situation that Kyle was talking about, in a corner, trying to get him out of the corner without, the worst thing in the world is to watch a young person in that corner just get whip happy. And to me, there's you're not solving the issue that way. You have much better luck. If I was working pigs in a barn, I'd use my hands, and I think, yes, we're in a show, but showing, you got to use logic and sense sometimes. And I think anyone can appreciate that. But hey, listen, you know what, if class one goes in there and that judge says, I was waiting for somebody to do a backflip coming in the ring, and you know how to do a backflip, and I suggest you do it. But that, to me, using hands is something that I see too much of in the way that Brianna is talking about. And that is the thing I would look to avoid: resting an offhand on the pig's back or things like that. To me, that is a distraction, not a piece of showmanship.
Yeah, and I'd like to reiterate, that's my pet peeve, honestly, is wasted hand motions. I mean, I would, in an ideal situation, the brush is in your pocket unless you're cleaning them off, because I think it's a gateway to using your hands when you don't need to, with what Brianna said about resting it on your pig. And I don't know what the term is, but the chicken peck, where the pig's going like, perfect, in front of me, and then the offhand, the tap in the middle of the back drives me insane, and I don't know why. And it probably feeds into what Chris said. I mean, I was brought up where if you touched your pig, you're done. I mean, I don't know why, but it just, I got about 3 or 4 basic rules: was keep the pig clean, eye contact, keep the pig in between you, and don't touch them. And so that was kind of the 4 basic fundamentals that I was started showing in. And I mean, kind of, I guess, in big picture, I mean, the most, if you can maximize the product with minimize the effort, I mean, a chicken peck or what, I mean, using your knees, I mean, it's wasted motion, and it's particularly when you don't need to use it. And then, if you want to use a brush, you better make sure the pig's not dirty. That's the other thing, is when you use the brush to do the chicken peck, and then there's a big old dirt spot right on the show side. It's like, that just, I mean, be practical, I guess, is kind of my mindset. But the chicken peck drives me nuts.
Kyle, back to that point, I will say one thing that I'm with. If you have a brush, you have it for a specific purpose, and that's not it. And yet I'll see young people doing what you're saying, and they're driving a barrow into the ring that has a belly with sawdust all over it. They've done all this work, and they have a tool in their hand to make the right correction, and instead they're using it for worthless motion.
It's all for show, Chris.
but that is one thing I catch a lot, where kids enter the ring and they maybe didn't look close enough before they left the pen in the back. They've done a beautiful job of having that pig clean that morning or right before the show. They let them rest back in the pen, they get them up, and they brush their back off, but they don't look at their legs or their belly. And you want to talk about something distracting, is a beautiful clean pig that's got a belly full of shavings all over it. So, take that last look before you enter the ring, and it's, correct those little things, because it could be the difference maker for you.
I will say that one thing that will get you knocked out quicker than anything, and I may say that Dan Hogue may have taught me this a long time ago, but if you give your pig a kick anywhere, that is one quick way to be exited.
Amen to that. Or someone else's pig.
Just be a good person.
Yeah.
All right. So I think those are all great points. Got a couple chuckles out of those comments. So, but I just wanted to kind of wrap up the things that our 3 judges, panelists have pointed out. Making sure that you're going and watching those shows, whether that's watching the showmanship group ahead of you, or just sitting and watching the market barrow show when you're not in the ring can teach you a lot of the things that we've discussed today. You know, sitting down and watching what judges are looking for and what those hogs need to look like in order to maybe be at the top end of the show, or whether that's for showmanship as well. So, you know, sitting down and watching the show is one thing we really try to do with our at least older kids that we help, and just being able to say, hey, do you see what that showman out there is doing is something that we can use as a tool to show them what we've been trying to get through to them at home, maybe when we're working. So excellent things to keep in mind. And we want to just take a second here to thank our speakers for today. So thanks to our judges panel, and as well as Kara Comstock for joining us and taking time out of their Father's Day and Sundays in general. So thank you all. And I think we have a slide here. We're going to drop in the chat box a link to our survey. If you guys just want to give us a heads up of how you guys felt that this session went, we sure would appreciate that. And we thank you guys for joining us. This will be, this was recorded, and so we'll send this out to anybody that registered for the session today. So thank you all again and have a great day.